Hello everyone, I hope you're doing alright. Today we're talking about the Telekinetic Sage, the fun burst spec for all of you Sage mains out there. So if you're tired of throwing dots at people, this is probably the spec for you. Brief skim as usual, I'm not an expert, I just play a lot of this spec. I played this through Apex last expansion. Not much has changed, but I'm not an expert, so if you have any suggestions, things that I missed, feel free to leave them down in the comments below. I'm sure fellow players would appreciate it. All right, let's dive into things. For your tertiary stats in PvE, accuracy 110%, pretty much mandatory. In PvP though, you can kind of dump all your accuracy. You don't really need it. We do a lot of yellow damage in this spec. You don't need any of that accuracy. For your alacrity, either you're going to get that 2.2% alacrity, and that should compensate for most of your lag issues, or if you have the gear, you can go for a 10.4% alacrity. Now, if you can't reach that 10.4% threshold, don't even bother with it. Just go for that 2.2% threshold. Alacrity doesn't do anything unless you hit certain tiers. So if you can't quite get up to that 10.4% alacrity, don't worry about it. Literally just dump it until you get down to 2.2%. Then you should be ready to rock and roll. Throw everything else into crit, and then you will be good to go. For our legendary Stormwatch, pretty darn good tactical. What it's going to do is it's going to make all of your dots tick extra damage every time you use your gust, which is pretty darn nice. Additionally, it's going to keep our weakened mind on the target pretty much all the time. It's very, very nice. Legendaries, Unmatched Haste is going to cause mental alacrity to come back off cooldown faster. Every time you use your 4 speed, it's going to reduce the cooldown of mental alacrity by 5 seconds. It's very darn nice. Finally, Gathering Storm is going to make us do 20% more damage during mental alacrity, which is very good. Additionally, every time we use our 4 speed, the next damaging ability is going to do 20% more damage. It's pretty darn nice. Looking over here at our combat styles, here's what we have so far. Power of the Force is for single target burst damage. It's very, very good. We'll talk about some AoE options in a little bit here. Moving the line here, Cloud Mind is basically pretty much mandatory. It's our pretty much only defensive cooldown, which is, pretty good. We have another one, but they're both very slow. So having 2 is very, very nice. Moving the line here, Mental Disparity is going to make us do more damage with our weakened mind. That's pretty passive, pretty darn nice. Moving to the line here, Defensive Blast is going to increase our damage reduction by 5%. If you have no other healer in the group or no other sages taking Force Empowerment, you can take this and help out your raid team if you want to. You'll just miss out on that 5% little damage reduction. Force Mobility, pretty much mandatory. It helps you move when you're using Turbulence, which is pretty darn useful. Up here, Metaphysical Alacrity is going to give us more Force Speeds, which is pretty darn nice, considering that Force Speed is reducing the cooldown of Mental Alacrity and making us do 20% more damage. It's pretty darn nice. Some people will take Valorous Spirit in PvP. That little bit of extra DR is pretty nice, I won't lie, but it's kind of up to you. I just like having the extra damage of Metaphysical Alacrity. Here you have a choice, either a stun with Force Lift or a teleport with Phase Walk. Pick your favorite here. I personally like Phase Walk. I think it's more fun. Moving the line, Egress is great in PvP for breaking all of those roots. And then you're going to want to take Mind Ward in PvE to prevent you from taking 15% extra periodic effect damage. Beats poke in the eye. It's not great, not terrible. Could be better, could be worse. Now, if you want to, you can actually go with a big AoE build. So if you are going for leveling, or if you're going for heroics or something where there's going to be a lot of ads, you can totally take Dormant Tremors, which is going to make your Telekinetic Wave, which is the AoE version of our Power of the Force, do a whole bunch of damage if you use your Force Quake afterwards. So it's great for AoE fluff. You can also fluff with Forceful Retribution and Incoming Turbulence. Those are all be fluffing that AoE damage. So if you're going to be doing a lot of that questing content, maybe going back through chapters, that's probably not a bad idea. But for the purposes of this video, we'll be covering the basic fundamentals of the Telekinetic Sage. Before we talk about our primary damage dealing abilities, let's talk about our offensive cooldowns. We've mentioned them previously, but let's just make sure we're on the same page. Mental Alacrity is going to give you 20% alacrity and 20% damage thanks to our legendary for 20 seconds. It's very nice. It's 20 seconds of just flat extra damage. Pretty darn fantastic. It has a 1 minute 30-second cooldown. However, it can be shortened thanks to our Force Speed. Force Speed is usually just a movement ability. You can see here, move pretty fast when you activate it, but it's also going to give us this little buff called Galvanize, which is going to increase the damage of our next ability by 20%, which is pretty darn nice. Additionally, every time we use Force Speed, the cooldown of Mental Alacrity is reduced by 5 seconds. So what that means is that if you're spamming Force Speed 24/7, you will get a lot more Mental Alacrities up, which means you're going to be doing more damage. They kind of play into each other. Finally, we have our force potency here, which is going to give us 60% extra chances at getting a crit. Essentially, they're basically auto crits. So force potency activated, your next 2 abilities will basically be auto crits. It's pretty darn nice. Pretty darn nice. But that's not actually doing damage. Let's actually do some damage now. The first ability we're going to talk about is Weaken Mind. Weaken Mind is a damage over time ability. Duke wants attention. Hello. Weaken Mind is a damage over time ability. What that means is that it doesn't do a whole lot of damage at the beginning. However, you're going to see it slowly ticks in the target's debuff tray and does like 21,000 damage over the course of the duration. Now, it's not great damage, but it beats a poke in the eye. And what's going to happen is because thanks to our tactical, it's actually going to be refreshing pretty frequently. Every time we use some of our high damaging abilities here, like Power of the Force or Mind Crush, you're going to see that the duration of Weaken Mind is continually refreshed. So what that means is that it's basically a set it and forget it ability, so that every time you have Weaken Mind on the target, it's just going to be refreshing, doing that little bit of extra passive damage in the background that we really don't have to think about because, well, we'll just be refreshing it over and over and over again thanks to the other abilities that we're going to be using. If you have Weaken Mind on the target, you should be fine. If it falls off the target, please put it back on. It's basically free damage, and then you'll get laughed at like I did when I let it fall off during some mechanics in Apex. So please, by all means, keep your Weaken Mind on your target at all times. It's very important. But that's not big burst damage. I promised you big burst damage, so let's talk about 2 high damaging abilities here. The first is going to be Power of the Force. Power of the Force has a very long cast, but does a very impressive amount of damage here. So you can see if I hit the button, it has like a 2.5 second cast time, and then boop, it goes and hits the target for like 30 to 40k. It's pretty darn nice. It also has a relatively short cooldown, but the cast is very, very slow. It's painful. I don't want to sit through this over and over again. Well, fortunately, whenever we use our Turbulence, Telekinetic Burst, or Force Quake, you're going to see that it's going to start to glow. What this means is that anytime Power of the Force is glowing, it will be instant cast, and it's going to consume less force. And it's also going to reset the cooldown of Power of the Force. So you can see here, long cast, boring, lame. If we use Turbulence, oh, it's glowing now, it's going to be instant cast, boop, don't have to sit through that massive 2.5 second cast time anymore. It's going to be instant cast because we used our Turbulence, Telekinetic Burst, or our Force Quake. Pretty darn nice. I've mentioned it a couple times now, but Turbulence is our other high damaging single target ability here. Turbulence does a whole bunch of damage. It's pretty darn nice. Additionally, there's a chance it's going to tick twice. So it's just free damage. We love to see it. So the idea is that we want to be spamming Turbulence as often as possible, and we want to be spamming Power of the Force as often as possible. Those are your 2 heavy hitting abilities here. They kind of play into each other. It's a nice little setup. Let's talk about another set of interactions here between Telekinetic Gust, Mind Crush, and Project. Telekinetic Gust applies our Stormwatch, which is what we got from our tactical. You can see here it's going to apply this little Stormwatch debuff here, and now every time our dots are ticking, there's going to be a little extra bubble that flies in and does a little bit more damage to the target because we have this Stormwatch on. Additionally, every time we use our Telekinetic Gust, our Mind Crush is going to start to glow. So what this means is that Mind Crush is going to have a little bit of a faster cast time. So if you see here, we put Telekinetic Gust on the target, put Mind Crush on the target. Now a bunch of pebbles are going to come here and fly and start hitting this target because we have both of our dots ticking during Stormwatch. It's very, very nice. So the idea is that we want to be going from Telekinetic Gust right into Mind Crush to make sure that we're getting all those extra ticks of Stormwatch onto the target. Additionally, we have Project. Project is not that impressive of an ability, I'll be honest with you. However, if we use Project when Mind Crush is on the target, it's actually going to do more damage. So the little trio of abilities here that we want to be using is Telekinetic Gust, into Mind Crush, into Project. That will make sure all of our ability interactions are getting used basically in order. So far we have Power of the Force, Long Cast can be shortened by Turbulence, TK Burst, and Project to make it glow, and Instant Cast. It's pretty darn nice. And then we have our little interaction here of Telekinetic Gust into Mind Crush into Project. Now we have to talk about our primary filler here, which is our Telekinetic Burst. Telekinetic Burst does a couple things. For one, it does a minor, moderate amount of damage. Not great, not terrible, could be better, could be worse. But it's also going to be stacking these 3 stacks of Telekinetic Refuge, which is going to increase our damage reduction by up to 15%. It's going to be 5% per stack. So what this means is that you're going to be taking less damage, and especially in a class like this where we don't have a lot of defensive cooldowns, having that passive damage reduction up is going to be really, really important for us. Additionally, we can make these instant cast every time you use your force speed. You're going to get 2 of these little stacks of Clamoring Force, and that means you can instant cast Telekinetic Burst on the move without standing there and casting it. So what this means is that we can be relatively mobile because we have these instant casts of Power of the Force. We have these Turbulence on the move, which is very, very nice. And then we can be moving while we cast Telekinetic Burst. We can be moving while we cast Telekinetic Gust, and we can be moving while we cast Project. It's pretty darn nice and can make the spec very, very mobile. Depending on... Depending on what style of play we want to go for. All right? So, there are 2 ways to play this spec. The first is the hyper-mobile way. All right? The hyper-mobile way focuses on using this little priority system here. All right? This priority system says that Turbulence is the most important, followed by Power of the Force, followed by Telekinetic Gust, followed by Mind Crush, Project, and then fill with Telekinetic Burst. This is going to be the most useful to you if you do not stand around and cast a lot. If you're constantly on the move, you want to learn how to play the spec this way. This isn't... The debate's up if this is more damaging or if the set rotation is more damaging. The set rotation does a little bit more damage. However, the mobility provided by this little priority system is very nice. So what you want to be doing is you want to make sure you have Weakened Mind of the target, and then just go through and cast Turbulence, Power of the Force, all on the move, and then Mind Crush is the only time you really have to sit still here, and then just fill the rest in until your Turbulence comes back off cooldown. And then you can just start filling in with Telekinetic Burst, etc., etc. Now, the benefit of using a system like this is that you don't have to be perfect all the time. If I come here and I use my Telekinetic Gust when I should have used my Power of the Force, the humanity, yeah, that's fine. You don't have to be perfect when you're using a system like this. If your priorities are a little bit off, that's fine. Just do better next time. It gives you the advantage of being a little bit more flexible as a player without being landlocked into saying, I didn't do my rotation right, therefore I'm a terrible player, etc., etc. That's fine. Just follow this basic priority system here and you should be ready to rock and roll. This is going to give you a lot of mobility. However, if you have the benefit of using, or of turreting essentially, of standing still and only hitting the boss, what you can do is follow this very basic priority system. This priority system is broken down essentially into 4 blocks of 3 abilities. The first block is relatively simple. We go hard-casted Power of the Force into Turbulence into free Power of the Force. Now what this is going to do is going to give you 30k, 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 back to back to back. It's like 100,000 damage very, very quickly because we're going to go hard-casted Power of the Force, Turbulence into Power of the Force. Those are 3 very, very hard-hitting abilities back to back to back. It's a whole lot of damage. So that's the first part of the rotation. Very simple. Power of the Force, Turbulence, Power of the Force. Then we followed up with that same little interaction we had before where we went Telekinetic Gust, Mind Crush, to Project to make sure that we're really taking advantage of all those interactions. So Gust, Crush, Project. And then we go back into another Power of the Force, Turbulence, Power of the Force. Now you're going to notice here that it's going to be a very stationary rotation, right? So because we're forced to sit here and hard cast Power of the Force over and over and over again, you can't be moving around a lot while you do this rotation. Once you do the second block of Power of the Force, you're going to go and just 3 telekinetic bursts back to back to back. And then just repeat. And it's really that simple. It's a very straightforward spec. So we'll run through the rotation one more time here. Just make sure you have your weakened mind on the target for that free extra damage. Power of the Force, Turbulence, Power of the Force into our Gust, Mind Crush, Project, back into Power of the Force, Turbulence, Power of the Force, and then 3 telekinetic bursts. Now what we want to be doing is we want to be using our Power of the Force, our Force Speed on our second Power of the Force here. So Force Speed into Power of the Force, and then back into our rotation. Generally, we want to be using our Force Potency on Power of the Force and then Turbulence, since those are the 2 hardest hitting abilities here. So get those free auto crits. And then what we're going to have is a little bit of extra mobility because we'll have the free casting of telekinetic bursts. So again, Power of the Force, Turbulence, Power of the Force, and then all the buffs, interactions here of Gust, Crush, Project, and then Power of the Force, Turbulence, Power of the Force, and then back to back to back bursts. It's probably a good idea to learn both the basic rotation here, which frankly isn't that complicated, and the priority system. Because what you want to be doing is when you can sit down and really hard tunnel the boss or hard tunnel an enemy, you want to be using this rotation. And then when you need to get on the move, you should probably just remember these basic fundamentals of the priority system, and then you should be ready to rock and roll. It's a pretty good time. So breaking it all down one last time, Power of the Force, long cast time can be made shorter by Turbulence, Telekinetic Burst, and Force Quake to make it glow and do essentially free. Telekinetic Gust is going to make all of your dots do extra damage and make your Mind Crush activate faster. Project does more damage when Mind Crush is on the target. And then finally, Telekinetic Burst gives us that little bit of extra DR and is a great little filler ability. Let's talk about our defensive cooldowns because we don't have that many. The first defensive cooldown that we have is our Imbued Force Armor. This is going to give you a little bit of an absorb shield. It's going to absorb about 25,000 damage for the next 30 seconds and give you about 5% DR every time you see this little debuff on you. However, you can't be spamming this on yourself. You have to wait for this debuff to fall off, and then you can use your Imbued Force Armor again. That way you can't just spam it over and over and over again. So you got to wait out that 20 seconds to then reapply your Imbued Force Armor. Additionally, we have our Cloud Mind here. Cloud Mind is going to give you, for one, it's going to reduce your threat, so it's going to make the boss look away from you, hopefully. And it's going to give you 25% DR for, 6 seconds or so. It's not a great ability, but it beats a poke in the eye, and it might be the thing that saves you from, instant death. Our Oh Shoot button is our Force Barrier. Force Barrier is going to make you essentially immortal for 8 seconds, with the small caveat that you cannot move, and you cannot do damage, and you cannot heal yourself. So if you are stuck in an ability that's going to kill you, you can absolutely take Force Barrier, or you absolutely use Force Barrier. It is your oh shoot, I really messed up button, but have an escape plan afterwards. A good escape plan might be using, for example, a phase walk. When you use phase walk the first time, you're going to set down this little glowing phase. If you run away for 60 meters away and then hit the phase walk button again, boop, it's going to teleport you back to your previous location. This is really mostly used as a PvP mechanic, as a way to get away from players, but I've seen some instances and some bosses where the little teleport can be useful, especially when there's a console that you need to interact with. Finally, let's talk about our healing. Our primary healing is going to be our Force Mend here. It has a 30-second cooldown, but it isn't on the global cooldown, so that means I could be casting here and casting and casting and casting and use my Force Mend without, taking up a cooldown. So it's a pretty great way to be passively healing yourself. It does like 30k healing. Not great, not terrible. We have 2 very mediocre heals. The first is our Rejuvenate. Rejuvenate applies a small hot to the target. Doesn't do a whole lot of healing, I'll be honest with you. Do not be relying on this for heals. Benevolence also does a very minor amount of healing to the target. Do not be relying on this. It is not going to heal you for much. If it comes to the point where you're healing yourself as a TK Sage, things have probably already gone super wrong. So just start flaming your healers instead and fluff your numbers. All right, that's kind of the gist of it. Recapping one last time: Mental Alacrity is going to give you that whole bunch of extra damage. You want to be popping that pretty much as often as possible. Force Speed we want to be using with either Power of the Force or our Turbulence. And then our Force Potency we want to be using with our Power of the Force and our Turbulence back to back to make sure we get those massive crits. Follow this very basic rotation. It's pretty straightforward. If you have to get on the move, follow this very basic priority system. And that's really all there is to know. It's a pretty fun spec. Thoroughly recommend checking it out if you haven't tried it already. If you're sick and tired of spamming Telekinetic Throw and that other inferior Sage spec, you should totally come here and check out the Burst spec. It is a lot of fun. Hope you guys enjoy. If you have any questions, comments, complaints, concerns, conundrums, feel free to leave them down in the comments below. I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Anything else to say, Duke? No? No? You're done being a little menace? Yeah? All right. Like and comment and subscribe. Or don't. I'm not your mom. You do what you want. Take care. Bye-bye.